anyway, I have some word program that has the composite chart that's going to be interesting for you all to see.
Here we go.
Thanks. Anyway, so I got into this exploration of astrology, past life therapy, and quantum physics just by my own unique set of circumstances. And, you know, I would watch the astrology when these spontaneous bleed throughs would happen. And the charts were always triggered. I'm not here to teach anybody astrology. It's very complex. I will really just, I will gladly email people an article I wrote about this in the Journal of Regression Therapy that has birth data for everyone if they want to explore the astrology in detail. But I'm not here to do astrology. It's too complicated. But I will break it down to show you kind of astrology as a mathematical formula, kind of like a combination of a lock, I think is a really good early analogy, and everybody can understand that, you know, when the astrology lines up, like when the transits line up to different parts of each individual chart, including present life, past life, and there's total synchronization between the present life and past life, say, and I'll give you an example in section 2. We're doing section 1 right now. But, you know, you'll be able to see the simple mathematic, like the combination of a lock, I think, without knowing much about astrology. So that's enough about my background. What I want to do quickly is say that we're going to do 3 different sections. The first, and after each section, we'll have a chance for question and answer and discussion. And the first section has some real, when I reread it, it has some really great quotes. And so if you want to jot down the quotes and think about it, I think at the end of this section, when we have the quick Q&A and discussion, these quotes are so rich. I think they're really juicy for discussion. So I'll mention that ahead of time. And then the first section is kind of showing the combination of astrology, quantum physics, and past life theoretically. The second section will be giving 2 case studies, my own past life case study, and a man named Jeff Keane, who had spontaneous memories of being General John Gordon. And again, because General John Gordon was public enough to get a birth date, and I got to know Jeff and got his birth data, I had another case study to observe because Jeff's was also very spontaneous. So I'll show you how the theory applies in practice in section 2, and then we'll have another Q&A at the end of that, and we'll vote if we want to take a break at the end of that. And then section 3 is really going to be showing how this can be applied as regression therapists, how this information can have practical applications. Peg already brought it up when she talked about, you know, asking clients to get an astrology session when they seem to be struggling with making headway. So we're going to talk about that, among other things, as how to use this as therapists. You don't have to become astrologers, you know, although you might want to be more cognizant of using a good astrologer to recommend to your clients if they're having some blocks or issues or just want more insights. So those are the 3 sections with Q&A at the end of each. Okay, so let's jump into the first one. So I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I'll read parts of it. This is, and I tend to segue off of the written script too. So astrology, quantum physics, and past life phenomenon are all complex subjects. I'm sure all of you can agree. So I started attempting to show links among the 3 probably in the late 90s, and I published 2 articles in the Journal of Regression Therapy, which I'll send you the links to if you're interested. So I think through an understanding among all 3, I think we can gain some insights into consciousness, which is really what we're all fascinated with in this field, and also time, subjective perception of time. I mean, that's so intriguing with past life phenomenon. So, you know, right in the beginning, though, I knew this was going to be a lifelong project. You know, like so many things, the deeper you delve into it, the more questions come up. So I still have a lot of questions. But for those who aren't familiar with astrology and who've only seen the nonsense in the newspapers and magazines, it is really not a fortune-telling device. It is fundamentally a symbolic language of energy and cyclical time. And since past life phenomenon addresses the subjective experience of simultaneous, non-local, non-linear time, I think they have a lot to offer each other. Years ago, I went to Temple University in Philly. They had this really interesting professor there at the time. She's not there anymore, but she was bringing in really interesting kind of pioneering thought at the time. This was in the mid-90s. And a physicist, I heard a physicist talk named Dr. I don't know how to, I'll just call him Dr. Elitzer. He's a physics professor from Tel Aviv. And he was talking a lot about time. And he said it's always been the big quandary for classical physicists. Now, Dr. Elitzer really believes that there is a missing piece somewhere and that we need to turn to intuition and our subjective experiences to provide more information about the phenomenon of time. His view echoes Einstein, who said, even space and time are forms of intuition. Quote number one, I think would be fun to discuss. If you want to jot that down, even space and time are forms of intuition. We can discuss that after this section ends. So then Elitzer also commented that although we assume other spaces exist simultaneously to the one we are in, like, you know, wherever you are right now, you assume New York still exists, you know, simultaneously exists in the present. And we do not doubt that, okay? But the same assumption is not at all applied to time in our Western worldview. You know, in 2021, few people would agree that 1804 simultaneously exists. Now, as past life therapists, we know that other centuries simultaneously exist to the present in our own and in our clients' consciousness. So in that state, two times do coexist simultaneously, as well as two different geographic locations. So I think time is just so fascinating and so applicable to past life therapy discussions. So now most people who have experienced past life phenomenon, whether spontaneously or through guided regressions, offer much to us on the subjective experience of time. I know we all have had our own subjective experience of time and our own past life explorations for ourselves and seeing it in clients. Now, my own personal experiences led me to write, there are worlds within my mind which cross the boundaries of time and personality. That really is very similar to Carl Jung's view, because he felt that there is a part of the psyche not subject to the laws of space and time. And, you know, there was interesting discussion by some of you here knew Roger Wolger when he was very active in our field. And Roger was a Jungian analyst. And in Roger's book, he discusses near the end, one of the later chapters, you know, did Jung believe in reincarnation? I personally believe he did. His quote, this quote just is too classic. You know, there's a part of our psyche not subject to the laws of space and time. Wolger felt that Jung probably did also, but that, you know, he was already kind of pretty radical in his views for his lifetime in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I think he died in early 60s. So I think Jung wasn't about to publicly announce he believed in reincarnation in that time period, because he really felt it could damage the rest of his very, very valuable work. And I think he was very savvy there. But when you read stuff of Jung, I mean, you just kind of can read between the lines. And I've got a great quote coming up soon that is just blew my mind when I found it. That is by Jung. who also, by the way, was a firm believer in astrology and used it in his work with his clients. Okay, so here we are. Time, consciousness is a whole different ballgame than in the linear external world. So in states of past life recall, time is often perceived as nonlinear simultaneously. Like, two different years can be experienced as coexisting, at least in a person's psyche, or perhaps on some other level or field we have not yet named or identified. So I love the concept of field, that quantum physics uses a lot. And Rupert Sheldrake writes about that also. He's another interesting man to read. I don't use him in this presentation, but just an aside. So anyway, so if these coexistence of time exists on someplace, my question was, how is this perception in past life phenomenon connected to the concept of the implicate order that David Bohm, who was one of the early quantum physicists, uses to denote a level beneath the surface reality of seemingly separate things and events? It's sort of like, I'm a gardener, so I'm a plant person. So is Peg, I know. She and I were the earthy ones in our group. So, mushrooms, for example, you see the mushrooms pop above the soil above the surface and they're visible, but underneath is a whole network. Underneath the ground is a whole network of rhizomes. So in a way, the same thing is applicable, to the idea of the implicate order and a whole different level of reality existing that we can't see. So Bohm, I think, was the one who coined the phrase implicate order or frequency realm. And in this realm, all is undivided wholeness. So in this realm, you could have the consciousness of the present life and the consciousness of a past life, and it would be undivided. Now, Bohm also calls this underlying pattern the enfolded order. Now, I read this after I had done a lot of writing on my own experiences, so I found this very, very validating. I was attempting to describe a spontaneous past life bleed through, and I wrote about it in these terms. Time was bending, folding Margaret and me together like two sleeves of a blouse, neatly folded and placed in a drawer. And Dr. Chris Bache, who wrote Life Cycles, Reincarnation, the Web of Life, which is remains in my mind, one of the best books in the field. In his Oversoul chapter, he so exquisitely describes this kind of phenomenon. And in this chapter, he wrote, when he was inquiring as to the present status of his former lives, which is a really fascinating question, like, what's the present status of my past life? He asks, have they in some way been folded into me? So all of a sudden I was seeing this curious echoing of the word folded and folding, and it's curious that Chris Bache and I both chose the term folded, which totally echoes Bohm's term enfolded realm or frequency domain. So this leads to a question, and I did say there are more questions than answers, but I think good questions can lead us to what we need to discover. It may take decades, but you got to ask them first. Does a past life personality exist somewhere as a type of frequency? Be another fun thing to discuss. Okay. So let's look at this assumption that frequency image approximates past life phenomenon. And let's bring in astrology. So astrology can provide some interesting insights because the chart symbolizes a living wave or frequency pattern that makes up each individual. It's really like our energy matrix in a sense. And each person is like a unique system of energy within the ocean of space-time, another phrase for the implicate order or frequency domain. So the astrology chart shows the interweaving of the body, mind, and soul levels across time, across lifetimes. The chart can also be seen as a template for the quantum, or also called etheric body, which interpenetrates our physical life and form. At one of APART's conferences in 96, so I think it was still APART then, or IART for those of you more familiar with IART, Dr. Winifred Lucas stated that this past life experiences are stored in the causal body and filtered down in the quantum etheric level. In past life therapy, the quantum body is altered, which then manifests in the physical life of the individual. And this is all very much quantum physics talk also, all these terminologies. So the energy of the mental causal body, the level above the etheric, forms a pattern for that life, the design being at least partially derived from other life experiences. So then we have astrology as a tool for reading this pattern, or it's an X-ray of the soul in a way. Okay, think of it as an X-ray. Most are familiar with X-rays, or an MRI, to read the pattern. Thus, the design of a life is akin to an individual's unique relationship with the whole implicate order. Therefore, the chart can be compared to an individual's unique coding. I think that's a really good word. We're coded for certain experiences. We're coded, not in a rigid fatalistic way, but we're coded for individuating in our unique time and way, to use a Jungian term, to grow and evolve, to use more late term, and experiencing aspects of the frequency domain, such as past life phenomenon. And here's what's really key, as well as the timing of such experiences. Astrology is great at showing when the timing is right. I think right timing is a really great phrase of what astrology can show. So accessing past life material, as we all know, is really a different way of perceiving than occurs in ordinary waking consciousness. People who have these experiences could be said to shift into another perceptual frequency. So the neurophysiologist Carl Pribram, who coined the phrase holographic brain, considers people having, this is really a key point too, considers people having transcendent experiences as catching a glimpse of the frequency domain. He says, mystical experiences, or we could call them altered states of consciousness, makes sense when one can provide the mathematical formulas that take one back and forth between the ordinary world, or image object domain, and the frequency domain. Now, I think this quote by Pribram could be misinterpreted as alluding to a real mechanistic universe, but I don't think that's what he's alluding to at all. Nor, in my opinion, it's not what I'm alluding to when I talk about astrology being mathematical and kind of showing a formula that one is more likely to go back and forth between the ordinary world and the frequency domain. So, astrology is both an exquisite left brain science of mathematics, but it also uses intuition, which is right brain. And the reason I was drawn to it initially was it's a great whole brain tool. So I'm proposing that astrology provides the mathematical formula Pribram is seeking that can assist us in making sense of these perceptual shifts, especially, with spontaneous memories happen, or any spontaneous mystical experience. I mean, there's a radical perceptual shift. Planetary movements, which are called transits, can be seen as a moving geometry of dynamics in the psyche. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Stan Grof, who developed holographic breath work, and Richard Tarnas. Both of them worked at Esalen decades ago. And Tarnas is an astrologer, and both began applying transits in astrology and analyzing their people's experience in holographic breathwork sessions it's which are types of induced altered states using the breath, to discover if there were any correlations between planetary transits and people's experiences. They discovered the correlations were very strong. And again, we're not here to do astrology, but if anybody wants to read more by Rick Tarnas and Stan Groff, they have a lot on this. So Tarnas and Groff were predominantly studying induced states, but I'm suggesting that this same moving geometry astrology is also in effect during spontaneous transformational experiences, such as past life bleed-throughs, and those observed in more scheduled regression work. So, we all know that past life experiences are a type of altered state. And, in my past life therapy work, I've used the image that the mind is like a radio dial, which fits the frequency model. And I suggest that clients, we're going to turn their dial from the past life station to the present life, from the present life station to the past life station. I can only use that though with a population over a certain age because younger people don't know what radio dials are. But anyway, it's still a good analogy and seems linked to the frequency domain idea. So while the term moving geometry is a good verbal description, images are often more useful. I remember this, it was decades ago, I think it was in the 1980s. I was looking up at the sky one night, I was already using astrology, and the image came to me totally spontaneously. And I got this image that I mentioned earlier, that the spatial configuration or the geometry of the planets in the sky are really like a combination that opens a lock, both in outer events in a person's life and or internal shifts in consciousness, or an openness to transpersonal experiences. They're more likely to occur when the planets are aligned in a right combination and match an individual's personal chart, remember, which is their coding, okay? So there seems to be some kind of intrinsic design that guides people's individual development, including transcendent experiences and karmic overlays. Astrology clearly shows this. Now, it's important to say that a chart shows what is potential and not rigidly fated. It shows what is a probability, not what is rigidly inevitable. And this also shows another link with quantum physics, because quantum physics is always showing what's probable and not rigidly fixed. So there's a metaphysical philosophy theories that the soul participates on some level in choosing the script for a life, determined by the past, their behavior patterns, their samskaras, an Eastern term, their soul purpose, lesson, etc. Their script or coding would be mapped out by the astrological energies at their time of birth. Therefore, when a person is born in the subsequent energies that compose their life would be no accident. So one aspect of the script may be the type and timing of these transcendent perceptions and past life eruptions. I'm only going to focus on the past life experiences because that's what we do in our work. But there seems to be a clear astrological indicator of which people are more predisposed to access past life levels and who has a higher probability of this happening and when. The periods in their life that are like ripe times for such perception. So I'm not going to go into much detail because this isn't an astrology class, but quickly, the following indicators, and they're really archetypal energies. When I talk about signs and planets, they're really archetypal energies. So many people who actually work in the past life therapy field have a strong emphasis in the sign Scorpio and our planets in the 8th house. Looking for my water, hang on. And Pluto and its corresponding sign and house represent intense karmic clearing. It's about depth psychology, it's about transformation, it's about past life residues, and going deep. Scorpio as an archetype, and 8th house and Pluto, they're all the same energy archetypes. They're really about like an archaeology dig. They're really about digging beneath the surface and flushing up from underneath and bringing whatever's deeply buried up. And what It's exactly what we do in past life regression sessions. So people with this signature may have a life emphasis on this task. Combinations of the moon, which are emotions, and Pluto are also often strong also during the emotional makeup of people when they seem to have past life material really erupting in their life. And I've had so many clients come to me and say, they'll call me up and they'll say, or they'll email me and they'll say, God, I've been thinking about this for years. And suddenly they feel just compelled. And because of seeing astrology is a very valuable tool, like a doctor would use an X-ray, I always ask if they know their birth. Well, they usually know the birth date. I ask if they also know their time. And I'll look at a chart, and so often there's a major trigger to their chart that shows why they're doing it now and just, thought it over for years, but it wasn't time. It's amazing, the indicators that show when people there's a ripe time, as I've said before, when the material is kind of moving and pushing and erupting like a volcano. For example, if a person's natal Pluto, well, if a person's moon is a 26 Capricorn, Pluto's sitting around 26 Capricorn right now. Somebody is having Pluto almost like a roto-rooter kind of energetically burrow down in their psyche, stir things up, start erupting things, whether subtly or like a big volcanic eruption. And they're feeling it. They're feeling something stirring. They're feeling compelled to do this kind of work under that. That's just one example. I'm trying to keep it very simplified. So here's the big quote that I discovered about 3 or 4 years after I had written the first article for Journal of Regression Therapy. And I was blown away by this quote by Jung. So I already mentioned that he thought highly of astrology, used it with his patients. And his daughter was a professional astrologer. And near the end of Jung's life, he wrote her a letter and he said, the funny thing is that the darn stuff, referring to an astrology chart, even works after death. When I read that, my mind, because I'd been doing this work, and he was he was kind of implying that it had to do with posthumous events, in the outer world. And in one of my articles in the journal, I show very clearly how that is accurate, that the chart works posthumously in external events. But where I immediately went with this is, holy Toledo, if it's working if it's still working after death, could it also be working intrapsychically in the unconscious of a present life? So I think his quote has enormous implications for past life therapy, because it really implies that the vibrational pattern of a personality continues after death. So what I've been seeing in my research is that this energy or this vibrational pattern continuing after death is working intrapsychically or internally after death in the consciousness of a future life. And that's what we're going to explore in section 2. I'm going to talk about 2 pairs, as I mentioned, of present and past lives. And, I want you to look at the diagram here, because this is really key. This is kind of an energy flow chart. If you could move it up a little bit, Holly, thanks. Because most people think of relationships as 2 people interacting with each other. You can think of significant others in your own life, of many kinds of relationships. Most people assume it's just their energy and your energy interplaying with each other. What is really, really fascinating is you can take the 2 individual astrology charts of 2 individuals and draw up a field of energy that the 2 people create. It's a field that is seen in the composite chart. And as you can see, with the small arrows going diagonally between A and B up to the composite chart, that creates a field that in a way is a third partner in a relationship. And I've watched these composite charts for years, mainly with present life relationships. They are uncannily accurate. And what is really fascinating is it's not just person A and person B impacting each other. It's the field they create, then circling back down and influencing each of the individuals also. Okay. So if you want to just, if anybody's interested, well, we can send, Holly said we can send all this, all these files to everybody afterwards. But this is a real important concept that we're going to talk about in the next section. And, so think about a field that's created. And if you bring in Jung's quote that an astrology chart continues after death, then the field between a past life and a present life is alive. It's alive and impacting the present life and the past life. Okay, so this is a good place to stop. And this is the end of section 1, and have time for any discussion on those quotes or anything else that sparked your interest, or ask any questions. Okay. Marty has a question. Can you unmute yourself?
Unmute here.
Yes, got
There
it.
you go, Marty.
Okay, this was fascinating and very complicated.
It's very complex. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm going to send you the written, Word files so you can reread it if you're interested.
I will, yes, which won't make it any less complicated. But my question is about my natal chart, which I had done.
Okay,
And
good.
my natal chart, oh yeah, but it was for my birth date.
Okay.
Of this lifetime.
Okay.
When I was born, how the planets aligned, and it like a map. I see it as a map.
It is a map. That's another good image.
And but how does that carry over, or what about, a past life where I wasn't born on the date and time and place of...
Oh, well, that's a good question, Marty. And I think you're going to have your question answered in the next section, where I'm going to show you that it's not that the charts are the same between lifetimes, not at all. But there will be codings between the chart of a past life and a present life.
Because it's my energy in each life. I mean, it's like,
right,
whatever. So the chart from another, you'll explain it, but...
Well, I think you might, you can tell me after we do the next section, Marty, if you had some of your question answered, because we're going to talk about two cases of past life and present life. And I'm going to try to simplify the astrology a great deal, because this isn't a presentation to astrologers, but I'm just going to show you in a way, the combination of a lock analogy, where you can see the numbers lining up, like a combination of a lock, that when the transit activates, like say 17 degrees, 17 degrees, 17 degrees across, the experience from the past to the present opens. Is that a simple way to say it?
Actually, it's more complicated than I need a lot of talk.
Well, this is complicated. This is complicated. Marty, it is complex.
Yes.
And I've had decades to kind of ponder it. So if you're just hearing it the first time, I can understand that it's a little complex. So we'll send you the Word files and you can read more and mull it over as you like. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody like that quote about space and time being forms of intuition? I really am intrigued by that. Any thoughts? Yes, Georgina. You want to unmute? Did you have your hand up, Georgina?
No, I'm Serena.
Mike's not on,
And
Georgina.
is there a Georgina as well? I was just agreeing that I liked it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to know if I'm missing the point here. When I explain about time, dimension, energy to people who want to know about things like ghosts, I explain that it's all just different dimensions, and it's like a billboard that has different facets. I mean, every time it turns around, you get a different picture. Am I making it too linear? Is my question to you, because yours seems to be more multi-level than just that.
Well, I think this stuff is so complex for us to talk about with words. And so I think it's another great image. I think the image of the billboard is also good. I think the dilemma is translating, multidimensional phenomenon into
Understand?
words.
Yeah, I just don't want to mislead anybody, because I want to be sure that what I'm saying is appropriate and understandable. I just want to be sure it's appropriate from your point of view.
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
Okay, so, I go through life as a teacher, years and years, and I've always explained it this way. What I'm hearing from you, it's not just that. It is 50D as opposed to 3D, and so I'm going to have to find another imagery, another way of explaining it, if that's not good enough.
Well, I don't think there's one right way,
Okay.
I really don't.
I'm
I
looking
think
at you as
again,
the master here. Yeah.
yeah, I think the dilemma is translating these multidimensional layers of consciousness into words and into our more, linear,
Okay.
reality in the physical plane. It's
Okay.
tricky stuff, and multidimensional time and simultaneous time and
Yeah.
lead through from past life consciousness into the present life. This is complex stuff. So if anybody's going, yeah, this is complicated, it is complicated. And I'm just, exploring what, because of what I was given. I'm exploring
Okay.
it this way because of what I was
I just want to be sure I wasn't totally off.
No, I don't think there's one right way. This is
Okay.
my exploration because of
All
what I experienced and having the tool of astrology at the time and just kind of being intuitively guided.
Michael has a question.
Yes.
I just, if I may say, I like Richard Sutton's explanation that we live our lives like a three-dimensional chessboard, so that we're contacting the past, the future, and the present all at once.
That's another good one. Yeah. I think there's many great analogies and images that do better than words sometimes. That's another good one. Thank you. And Holly, did you have a question?
No, it was just letting Michael know that he wanted to ask a question.
Oh, okay. Anybody else? Yeah, Greg.
Mike, Greg, we can't hear you.
Can you unmute Mike? I mean, Greg.
There you go.
My perception of all of this is too much information. There's too much going on. And so to nail it down in some linear, in a sentence, is nice, but it's like there's 10,000 sentences running around at the same time. So that's my perception of things.
I'm having trouble understanding you.
We're having
That's
mic
right.
problems.
What's that?
We're having mic problems like we had the other day. We can't hear you.
Okay. Don't worry about it. I'll let it go.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've been living with for decades. So, you know, I don't have the answers. I have a lot of interesting questions, though, I think, you know, so I'm just tossing this out for anyone to mull over and explore. And I will give you some practical applications at the end, I promise, for past life therapy clients.
Sandy had a question.
Sandy?
Hi, I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to comment because you asked what did you think about that quote, even space and time are forms of intuition. I thought that was really fascinating. So when I heard that quote, what came to my mind was, if we don't have a concept of time, meaning it's not linear and everything happens at once, then when I heard that, if you think of it in that way, it could be that all of our lives are kind of happening at the same time. So we can access different parts of our lives. And that would be, in my mind, glimpses of intuition. So when I heard that quote, that was the thought that came to my mind. I don't know if that's what it means, but that's what I took from it.
That's great. I mean, I just thought it would be a great topic to discuss because it's a wonderful quote. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
And I'm thinking, Holly, that after hearing some of the feedback here, I think I'm going to jump to file 3 and we'll go over the practical applications
Okay.
next.
All right. Are you ready
Because
for that now?
the other material is a little complex and I think the practical applications may be very welcome right about now.
Are you ready?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Let me.
If there are no other questions.
One more question with Marty while I'm doing this.
Marty.
In response to what you said just made me think, if we are living all our lives kind of simultaneously on different levels, where does karmic journey is how I see my life, you know, all these karmic journeys where you are resolving and moving towards it's either self-actualization and more I don't know, whatever, towards moving forward in that realm. How do you do that simultaneously? How do you learn from a past life and you know, address it in some way or whatever we're supposed to be doing, who knows, in a new life, the next life, if all the lives are happening together? Whatever, that's what it brought up for me.
Well, that's okay. I think it's great to share what it brings up. And I think, you know, I'm going to talk about in the next section that I'm not sure we have access to all our lives in every lifetime. And I'll go into my view on that. Yeah. So let's jump into first, just to answer that. I mean, I got this insight years ago. It was intuitive and I don't have any proof. You know how we don't have any proof for a lot of this stuff, but I got the image years ago, decades ago, that we have, let's say hypothetically, we have 100 lifetimes, and these are arbitrary numbers. Let's say that the oversoul, like this guiding vaster part of ourselves that knows what we're here to do this lifetime, to grow and heal, decides that, well, helps us choose, okay, there's going to be 10 relevant lifetimes out of 100 that you're going to be working on this time around. So those 10 lifetimes go into what I labeled the active file drawer. Okay. And then the other 90 are in an inactive file drawer and aren't even relevant to this time around. That's just one image that came to me. Now, I did have some validation for that years after I got that image. Again, I'm talking about Chris Bache's book, Life Cycles. Because I think his Oversoul chapter, everybody should read that's in this field. And in his Oversoul chapter in that book, he quotes a colleague of his that got a similar analogy, got a similar feel that we don't have access to all of our lifetimes. And his analogy was a deck of cards. Mine was an active file drawer and an inactive file drawer. Dr. David Klein's analogy was a deck of cards. And let's say there's 52, there's 52 cards in a deck. But let's say we're only dealt 7 or 12 or however many. So again, we're not dealing with 100%, that there's a wisdom guiding the choice of what the relevant lifetimes are for each time. It speaks truth to me. I don't know how anybody else feels about it. I got the image of the file drawers years before I read about Dr. David Klein getting the image of we're dealt a hand. We're not dealing with all the lifetimes. We're dealt a hand of so many. Interesting. Again, to speculate and discuss. But I thought, because the first section was pretty complex with the astrology information, the quantum physics information, let's talk about just how to apply this. And Peg already mentioned it in her talking about us knowing each other and how she would occasionally refer clients to me that were kind of struggling. I think one of the best benefits for past life therapists and their clients is astrology can help explain why some people have profound shifts or pattern breakthroughs as a result of past life work, while others have none or very little. Astrology could kind of add the perspective that there's a ripe time. There's a season, there's the right season in somebody's life for patterns to change. And perhaps a person is not unwilling to change. It just isn't time in their life script for that shift to occur. So transits can be seen as a type of wave frequency patterns interfacing with a person's personality frequency, and they can reflect times where the potential for changing or existing patterns are the greatest. So the energy field of our personality seems to become more fluid during these ripe times. It's almost like, soft clay that's warmed up is able to be remodeled versus, clay that's been sitting out in a winter in a snowy climate that's stiff and you can't budge it. So you warm up the clay, you can remodel it. So that's just an analogy that there are times when our energy is more able to be remolded. So therefore, aligning with the soul plan for our lives appears to be both effective and efficient. Perhaps these changes can occur at other times with much more effort, or maybe there are windows of opportunity that open for a time for us to, us or clients to, really make breakthroughs and then close, waiting for the next cycle. But I think it brings up the question of fate versus free will. I'm not a rigid fatalist, and the problem I have with Eastern thought is its rigid fatalism. I think there's kind of a combination of fate versus free will. And I think some people's life scripts are more fated and others have more free choice, but that's a whole other discussion. But I think what's, the quote that's related to this that I also read decades ago or heard decades ago by Patricia Sun, it's paradox. Her quote is, we are both 100% in control and 100% not in control. And that is just pure paradox. So I think where astrology can really benefit clients and past life therapists, which Peg mentioned, is that if a client is really struggling, or if a client has come to me and is not getting anywhere, I will look at their chart and I will say, I don't want you to think that you do not ever have the capacity to get benefits from this work or access this level in your psyche or this level of consciousness. And I will using a chart, I can see when one of these ripe times will be around. It's usually lasts for months, not just a day or even a year. With Pluto transits, they're very slow moving. And I can say, please, don't assume that because you can't do it now. It's almost like the soft clay isn't remoldable yet in their psyche. But if you look at when the energy is more ripe, you can recommend that they do the work then, so that they're not discouraged and they don't assume they can never, ever benefit from this work. Now, I don't have a lot of those because usually people come to me for this work, as I mentioned earlier, when something's really pushing. So usually they come when something's already stirring, and I can look at the chart and I go, oh, of course they're coming now because they have this Pluto thing going. And, so it's usually a right time for them or they wouldn't be coming. But for those few clients who maybe aren't coming because of some inner prompting and are coming more from an external curiosity or somebody suggested it, and it's not an intrinsic internal prompting, that's where astrology can maybe guide them to come at a more opportune time. That's one really good use. Now, because we didn't do section 2, I'm going to have to give you just a little quick review of this tool this homework that I give to clients. What I'm going to show you in the final section is how, in a way, the past dialogues with the present. Okay. And astrology can show when in a way the phone line is kind of more when the phone's ready, more likely to go off between the past and the present lifetime. And so this interplay between the past and present life personality is really like a dialoguing. And again, I'm bringing in Beish because I think his work just really captures the essence. He speculates that past lives aren't merely static memories embedded into present life's unconscious, but are more like, is a really good phrase, and it's been my experience that this is true. They're more like dynamic living realities. They're still dynamic. They're still existing on some level. And they dialogue with the present life for the purpose of growth and healing. And I call it a kind of teammates across time going on. So, what's helpful with astrology, again, it can reveal when this dialoguing is more likely to occur. Or to put more humorously, when the phone rings from the past, another century into the present century, when the calls come, across time intrapsychically. So those are two, so keeping on with the dialogue, I'm going to kind of jump around and do this in different order today, but keeping with the dialoguing idea, one tool I used in my own process when I was having past life material come up, whether spontaneously or with a regression that, the regression fleshed up a lot, but there was more layers to work through. I would start dialoguing with my past life on paper. And I would write something like, hello, I'm your present life. Thank you for showing up and letting me know you're there. Thank you for letting me know what's unresolved for you. And is there something I can do to help you? And then I would let the past life respond. And you have to go into an intuitive, just let it intuitively flow, because you have to let them talk to you from where their perception is. And their perception may be another century that they don't understand the cultural changes. And they're still locked in guilt or something from a past life. I can give you an example. That young man I talked about with the World War I life who died with that survivor guilt. I mean, Scott could have gone back and dialogued with him. And we did a lot of this in the session, but if he needed to do more, outside of our work together, he could have said, let me share with you that there was no reason to be guilty. you know, you were injured, there wasn't anything you could have done for your men then. You know, he could have gone on and helped, and then let him speak his guilt, let him speak it out so he was heard, but keep dialoguing. I hear you, but there's no reason, you know, just a kind of a healing goes on. These dialogues are powerful. I've suggested clients do them as homework. Some do, some don't. I've done them myself. It's enormous how much deeper the work can go. Because you know, as therapists, it can't all happen in a session, a 2 or 3 hour session. So if a client is willing to do homework and taking what emerged and taking them becoming conscious of a past life personality who really wants to dialogue with them, will make it literal. Make it literal and do the dialogue intuitively. And when I do that, it's literally like, I can feel a different personality coming through when I ask the past life to comment to what I just said. It's a very powerful healing technique. You know, some of my clients love it and have done really powerful work with it in between sessions. So that's another really valuable, you know, tool that you can apply, not necessarily using astrology, but this concept that past lives are like dynamic living realities. And to circle back to Jung quote, you know, that the chart continues after death. So that means the life energy of the past life continues after death. And you can see when there's going to be dialoguing going on. Makes sense, everybody? Makes no sense. It may be time now to break again before we go into the really more detailed case studies to show how the astrology shows when the dialogues are going to happen and when the you know, when the lock opens, you know, using the lock and key, when the lock is going to open between the psyche of the past and the present. So let's just take a little break again and go into questions, comments. Yes, Roberto.
Hey, that was fascinating. That was amazing. So I kept hearing the word intuition come up, and intuition, you know, from my perspective, it's ruled by fire, right? The fire sign and all that. It doesn't think, like fire just burns, it goes. And it's almost like the thought of consciousness in a sense where it just happens. And it's the point of origin. And also, like you said, it's expansive at the same time, but there's no beginning, there's no end, it just is. And that intuition is just that, I guess, God in a sense, or universe, source, spirit communicating to us all the time. And, you know, it's hard to explain. It's definitely hard to explain, but it's always there, it's ever present, and it's always pushing toward a direction in a sense without thinking. It just occurs. And it's fascinating. It's just how everything's tying together. It's blowing my mind, but it's super fascinating. It's great. Yeah.
Thank you, Roberto. That's good comment. Yeah, I think intuition is really the only way to understand a lot of these phenomenon that we work with, more than our linear logical minds.
And I have a question, comment around what you were also just saying around dialoguing with the past life self. I've been contemplating, when we think about even the work that we do with our own guided meditation and even turning to guides, and I've started kind of exploring the idea that sometimes the work that we're doing presently with what feels like guides or future selves could be that part of ourself that is dialoguing with what is now and their experience, our past life, like that we are currently. So it could go both ways. So like when you were saying that you dialogue with that past life, and I've been thinking about this a lot with inner child work, of dialoguing with the inner child in order to heal the childhood traumas, but then reflecting back on things that you explore or ponder when you're a child, and where you get insight that's much more mature than what you're actually capable of at that age.
Mhm.
And is it possible that we're going in both directions, that there are times where that future life is connecting with us currently, having that conversation, and we're experiencing it as a guide, but it's really like what you were describing of us going back to the past life and having that dialogue, so that both lives are experiencing that interaction.
And
Does
can
that-
exchange and can learn and teach each other in a way.
Right. So that in the same way that you were saying that you were getting informed by that past life, I wonder if our current lives, when we feel like we're being informed by a guide or maybe a future life, it's the other side of that dialogue.
It sounds like it makes sense to me. Mhm.
Um,
I think what I want to the reason I brought up that tool of dialoguing as a practical application, that past lives are dynamic living realities that want to dialogue with us. I find if a client really has a lot of catharsis and a lot of complex traumatic material come up,
mhm,
I find that this dialoguing technique is a way for them to anchor, I mean, to contain, all the stuff that's been stirred up between sessions, so that they can, in a way, contain it on paper. It's not just spilling out. They can pick a certain time and so many times a week and sit and let the past life personality continue to dialogue with them and respond to them. And the work continues then between sessions with the therapist. And especially for the eruption of really complex,
mhm,
traumatizing emotions, I think it's good. It's a really good exercise to offer a container and something for the clients to feel empowered to continue working with the material in their own way and time and at their own pace. But there's something about writing it down on paper that contains it. And then they can bring that into another session. But they've continued to work with the energy and move the energy and contain the energy and get ongoing insights from that past life experience, and then provide a perspective that the present life has, that the past life could use, maybe to let go of what they're holding on to. So it's a very interesting tool.
right.
Uh,
And that actually kind of then brings in that idea that when you're healing yourself, you're healing 7 generations ahead and 7 generations back. And it
Mhm.
also ties into the idea that, I mean, I often experience with past life regression that it's really seemingly the only way to time travel. And when people say that if you time travel, then you change the continuum. But if you're going back and you're working with that past life, it seems like it's possible that you're both healing your current self and you're healing that past life simultaneously.
Mhm.
Um, so that on a quantum level, it does seem like it does change the entire dynamic. But where we worry about that with like the idea of like a time machine, that it is actually very healing in practical experience.
Mhm. Excellent points. And I think, what you brought in, Serena, is that there's an interplay going on across time and
Mhm,
across consciousness between the present life consciousness and the past life consciousness, just for simplicity's sake. And that,
mhm,
as the present life heals, the past life heals.
mhm,
And again, Beish says something about this in that Oversoul chapter, about once there's enough healing, the past lives start dialoguing with us because something's still bothering them. They didn't resolve what they couldn't resolve in their lifetime. And
Mhm.
so we're the dynamic point of growth in the present. Okay. So, they're dialoguing with us, say, hey, this is unresolved. And so once the present life works, with the past life, interplay back and forth, there's a teamwork going on.
Right.
And the present life through their actions and work heals what was left unresolved in another lifetime. Eventually the past life can just, in a way, fade into I'm not sure what words, again, words are so hard here. Eventually the impact or the interplay with the past life with a lot unresolved in the present life, gradually diminishes as the healing is completed.
Well, wouldn't that be similar to integrating?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
there's a
integration.
personality that is
Perfect. Yeah,
really
as the
struggling.
integration happens, there doesn't need to be an ongoing, dialogue.
Right.
The integration, once it's complete.
Relax. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent points, Serena.
Well, thank you. This is very interesting.
But I just wanted to provide, most of us are therapists, tools to use with your clients, just to recap, if a client has a really intense session and they can't get back to see you for X amount of time, that dialoguing exercise on paper, I think it's important to have it on paper versus just in their head, because there's something about grounding it physically. I think that really adds something to their containing the energy, so it doesn't just spill out, over their life in a difficult way, and they have a structure to work with it. And then, to use astrology, you don't have to become astrologers, but, if a client just can't get there, you might suggest they see an astrologer, and the astrologer could tell them when the right time would be, so that they don't have a lingering belief, oh, gee, I can't ever do this. Oh, gee, I read about the benefits, but it's not for me. Oh, gee, I can't benefit. Well, maybe it's just not the time for them to benefit for whatever reason. And astrology can provide a hint to when a ripe time would be. No guarantee, but at least it can provide some framework or a hint of when a riper time to access those levels for a person who would be struggling. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah. And do you have time for one more response
go
in
ahead.
terms of Marty?
Absolutely.
So I was curious, maybe in expanding on what Marty was saying about having a different chart in your past life versus your current life, but wouldn't that be similar to, we have our natal chart, but then we can also have a current transit chart, and that's going to be different in terms of what's going on currently in our current experience. So wouldn't it be the same that, like, we have that past life experience, we come in and we have our natal chart, we then have later transits, and then when we die, our new chart in a new life would be congruent with what would then be that transit chart if you were still alive,
Yeah,
because it's just kind of where you're at in that moment.
right. Well, now might be time, Marty. I'd said the next section was going to answer your questions, but then I thought I was getting the kind of feeling that I had to lighten it up and drop the complexity temporarily because section 2 is kind of complex. So I moved it. I brought this in, which is a little, I think, easier to assimilate. So let's dive into looking at 2 case studies and the charts, and showing the kind of combination of a lock phenomenon. Okay. So file number 2. Okay. And, again, we'll send this to you, and it's complicated. Okay, we lost it. It's okay if you're more confused than anything right now, because I think learning any new thing, the first phase is, sometimes being a tad confused. It's part of the learning process. Okay. So I'm using 2 examples where the past life phenomenon was totally out of the blue and spontaneous. versus somebody doing a schedule regression with a therapist. Okay, so I'm using the cases of Jeff Keane and General John Gordon and myself with the author Margaret Mitchell, who lived in Atlanta. Okay. So what's curious about this is Jeff and I had the experience that I wrote about, that I'm about to read in 1979. Jeff had the experience that he wrote about in May of 1991. Jeff and I only met in 2001. So we did not know each other when each of us had this experience and wrote what we wrote. But I think what you're going to see is an incredible similarity and in what we experienced in a spontaneous past life bleed through that was triggered by being at a physical location that was significant to the other life, to the past life. So it was the it was the location that triggered the eruption for both Jeff and I. But I'm bringing this up, it's not like Jeff and I compared notes. We met a decade after he had his experience and over 2 decades from when I had mine. Okay, so I don't know how many know Jeff's story. He wrote a book called Someone Else's Yesterday. It's a very good read. Jeff is, just to give you a quick intro, Jeff is he's retired now, but he spent his career as a professional firefighter in Connecticut. And I mean, just earthy, macho, grounded, practical reality kind of guy. You know, he was not looking for those. So I think that's important. So he and his wife were on vacation. They were in Maryland looking for antiques, and they were near where the Civil War Battle of Antietam was fought. And Jeff had never read a book on the Civil War, had any affinity consciously with that era. But on that trip, he suddenly felt compelled to visit the battlefield. His wife stayed in the car, and he just felt pulled to walk down to a portion of the field called Sunken Road. And he listened to an audio tape, narration of the events that took place there in 1862. And the battle involved a regiment called the 6th Alabama, which was commanded by a Colonel John B. Gordon. After listening to this material, he walked along the own farm lane and unknowingly, at least unconsciously, walked into the area that had been occupied by Gordon and his men. And it was at this location, let's just say, Jeff broke through the frequency domain into a whole other dimension. And this is what he wrote. Years later, he wrote this. A wave of grief, sadness, and anger washed over me. Without warning, I was suddenly consumed by sensations. Burning tears ran down my cheeks. It became difficult to breathe. I gasped for air. As I stood transfixed in the old roadbed, to this day, I cannot tell you how much time transpired, but as these feelings, this emotional overload passed, I found myself exhausted as if I had run a marathon. Crawling up the steep embankment to get out of the road, I turned and looked back. I was a bit shaken, to say the least, and wondered what had just taken place. It was difficult getting back to the car because I felt so weak. I had regained most of my normal composure on the way back and said nothing to Anna, his wife, about what had just happened. What could I say? How could I begin to explain this to her? I did not have any answers, just questions. This is from his book, Someone Else's Yesterday, where he writes, about his whole experience. Okay. Now, what's significant about Jeff? Let's recap. He was a macho firefighter. He was not consciously interested in the Civil War. He had never read anything about it. He was not involved in metaphysics or meditation or any woo anything. And he's drawn to this battlefield, has this, what I talked about in the first time, a total shift, across the frequency domain into a whole other dimensional realm of reality, and had emotions erupting that he had no understanding where they were coming from. They were intense, a sense of timelessness. He didn't know how much time passed. And it shook the hell out of him, as one could imagine. Okay. He wasn't interested in reincarnation either, by the way. So now, my story began in 1979, 5 years after being assigned to Atlanta as a VISTA volunteer. That's kind of the domestic Peace Corps that existed then. My senior year in college, I applied to VISTA and told a friend, I remember where I was sitting when I said this to this friend, I wanted to see where the winds of life would take me. Months later, I headed to Atlanta where I had been assigned, and the training was held in the Georgian Terrace Hotel. Now, I drive to Atlanta, had never been to Atlanta. I was from Pennsylvania. Holly, could you move it up just a tad? So I had never been to Atlanta, but what's curious in hindsight is I got off at an exit that, this was before MapQuest GPS. This was 1974. I went to Atlanta. This was before anything but paper maps. I looked back after all this stuff had been happening for years and realized how bizarre. I got off at exactly the right exit. I knew exactly to turn left and drive down Peachtree, and I drove right to the Georgian Terrace where training was being held. Now, what's interesting about Georgian Terrace is that it's the first place I set foot in Atlanta, but in that hotel lobby, it's an old historic hotel, is where Mitchell handed over her manuscript for Gone with the Wind to the Macmillan editor in 1934 or 5. So there's a little link in just physical, geographic similarities, but absolutely nothing erupted for me until 5 years later. What's significant about me is I was very much a scientist. I was not interested in reincarnation. I didn't believe in reincarnation. I was kind of an agnostic. I was not interested in Gone with the Wind book or film at all. So that's where I was when this sudden eruption happened. So there were a few little incidents that I won't go into detail because I don't want this to drag on. But one day I felt this pull to go to Margaret Mitchell's former home. I had found the address, and it was just a ramshackle house on the corner of 10th and Crescent Avenue. And I had driven by it umpteen times in 5 years, never felt anything at all. But that day I felt pulled to go there. And I got a chill down my spine when I saw the address was the one I had written on the piece of paper, but I didn't understand it because I was very much a linear scientist. And if I didn't understand it, I would kind of go, that's silly. And I got back in my car and started to drive away. And I had an eruption very, very similar, as you will hear, to Jeff Keene's experience on Sunken Road. After turning right onto Peachtree Street, the oddest and most complex sensation I've ever experienced washed over me completely out of the blue. It is difficult to describe because so many things were happening simultaneously, plus my perception of time changed drastically. While it felt like a long time passed because the experience was so varied and intense, in actuality, the phenomenon probably lasted only a minute or two. The unexpected began with powerful emotions erupting forcibly and spontaneously. I burst into tears and sobbed from a depth of my being that I hadn't even known existed. And simultaneously, a tape started going off inside my head with the words, I've come home, playing over and over again. The emotions behind the tears were mixed and very paradoxical. I felt both exquisite joy and elation at having returned home, along with intense feelings of grief and melancholy. Tears of both joy and sadness flowed together. All this time, I was attempting to safely steer my car down Peachtree Street. Luckily, it wasn't a high-speed, heavy traffic area. This section of Peachtree also appeared different to me. On one level, I could see it in the present tense, but I also could feel time sliding. Some yesterday I didn't even know I had came right up to me and hovered by my side. I was viewing, or rather feeling, Atlanta over several decades simultaneously. Something very mysterious seemed to be erupting from a past, but a past I did not consider my own. Whose yesterday was this? It seemed to belong to someone who was me, yet another, and suddenly there was a hazy line dividing us. Gradually, by the time I reached the Fox Theater, that was about 5 or 6 blocks away. My mind was firmly back to the present, but I was left feeling extremely disoriented. Very much like Jeff Keane described. Scared too. Was I going mad? Nothing like this had ever happened to me before. Feeling this much out of control was very unpleasant. My logical intellect, which had previously relied on to orient me in life, couldn't even begin to explain this, nor did I have anyone to talk to about what had just happened. Stunned and baffled by the preternatural tone of the past few moments, I went home and slept, totally exhausted. I hope you can see the similarities. Jeff and I were both stunned. The eruption was sudden, unexpected, out of the blue. We thought we couldn't begin to explain it. We felt alone. I had no one. I mean, I didn't know what this meant. I wasn't drawing conclusions at this point, but all I know is that something totally baffling had happened. Okay. So the spontaneous bleed throws with Mitchell in my life continue for decades. And so I started observing the astrology. But what was interesting about what was going on at this time in spring of 1979 was the planet Uranus, which has all to do with sudden and unexpected, just mind-blowing, eureka, boom, lightning bolts, expect the unexpected with Uranus, was at 20 degrees Scorpio. And all you need to know, because this isn't an astrology, is that it was triggering a very significant point in the composite chart between Margaret Mitchell and myself. So again, it was like, in addition, Pluto, which has to do with past life memories and eruptions, was at 1718 Libra, and again, activating a significant part in our composite chart, the planet Pluto, at 18 Cancer. So you can see the numbers, 2020 at the top, 1818, again, the combination of the lock. So that was like the first dialoguing, to use Beche's metaphor, between Mitchell and myself. Now, probably most of you would not know this, but Margaret Mitchell died suddenly and unexpectedly, hit by a car in 1949. So her death was sudden. And when death comes suddenly, we pretty much take the unresolved material into another lifetime. So there seemed to be a mathematical synchronization of the evolving energy between the past life of Mitchell and the present life of myself when this started erupting out of the blue. Similarly, the astrology of Jeff Keane and Gordon, again, I just want you to see the numbers. The numbers of 2020 and 1818 were match. Now with Jeff Keane, again, it shows a ripe time for past life memories to emerge, which may not only have to do with the present life's chart, but the continuation of energy of the past life personality. So looking at the charts of Keene and Gordon, the first event, where Keene unexpectedly experienced that amazing eruption of intense feeling at Sunken Road out of the blue in May of 1991. There were major triggers to both charts. Again, I put the numbers in bold because this isn't an astrology class. So there was Uranus at 13. There was Pluto at 13. So again, 13 and 13. Synchronization of the combination of the lock. And for those that want to delve into this more, there's a lot more material here in the article that I wrote in the journal. And then looking down to the next paragraph, there's a synchronization. 18, Scorpio, 17, Aquarius. The numbers match. There was a mathematical relationship. So I intentionally kept this as astrologically simple as I could, and I just put the numbers in bold so you could see the combination of the lock at play here. So when all these energies matched up, like the combination of a lock, opening up the past life personality in a way, the right time for that consciousness to just push through into the present life, there was a synchronization as the numbers show. Okay. And I know this is complex for people who aren't astrologers. That's why I kept it as basic as I could, just to show you, the numbers matching as they do. And Holly, is there another page, or is that the last one there? So what, to sum this up, now that I'm using two concrete examples, and Jung's quote about the past life charts continue after death, and we all know that consciousness continues after death. So the actual chart, though, of the past life somehow by transit synchronizes with the present life and shows when the dialoguing between the past and the present happens and when healing is more potential. So that's my theory. That, again, it's complex, I know. And, but it's interesting stuff. And I'm gathering more cases. You can really only use cases where the past life, it doesn't have to be a famous person, but public enough that you can get an accurate birth date. Because let's face it, we don't have birth dates for most anonymous past lives that erupt in our psyche or emerge in our psyche. Okay, now, Marty, does that answer your question?
I don't know if there are answers because it becomes more questions, but yes, it was.
Questions are good. Questions are very good.
I got that. However, so this is the question that came up for me. Okay, so when we go into a past life, we because that's our past life. So are you saying in this example, was Margaret Mitchell who you were, she was one of your past lives, or was it that little picture of the third relationship thing? Here was you, here she was, and you combined an energy of relationship, a third person or a third energy field. Or were other people, have other people gone back to the same kind of person? Like, would there be other people going back and saying, having that kind of like experience around Margaret Mitchell at a different phase?
I have no idea. The third energy field is a blending of the two personalities. And what the reason I bring it in is that third energy field is usually applied to present life relationships. Like, all of you could look at the energy field that's created with your significant other if you have both charts and draw up the energy field astrologically of the relationship.
Okay.
But what I'm proposing, there's also a relationship that's formed between past lives and present lives for the purpose of growth and healing. That's what I'm proposing. That there's a relationship that is established between
Right.
past life and present life for the purpose of growth and healing. And you can see in that relationship field, for example, just again, the mathematical formulas. There's significant interplay between the degrees 14 and 17 Gemini, between Mitchell and my chart and the relationship field. And when that's activated, the stuff emerges. That's a very simple formula, but it's there. I think the key to take from this is that I'm proposing that relationship field is relevant between past and present life because a relationship is established between the past and present across time for the purpose of growth and healing.
I just kind of brought in. I was just thinking more. My question was more about was Margaret Mitchell was a past life that you experienced from her birth to her death? I don't know.
Well, there's just been a lot of experiences, whether it's a literal past life, who can prove anything. There's just a lot of material. Right. Yeah. That went on for decades. So
your connection to her.
Yeah.
Okay. That answers.
Yeah. And I wasn't interested in her or the book or film before.
Yeah. I get that. That.
I'm still really not.
Whatever.
But I think she was sick to death of the whole thing and had to die to be free of it. That's my theory. Anyway, any other questions, comments about this idea of relationships that are formed between past and present lives, for, working through things, and that kind of links back to that dialoguing, idea.
Jill has a question.
Yes.
Not related to what you were just talking about, but I was curious. Was there a point when you didn't feel the connection to her anymore?
It's diminished, I think, because so much healing has taken place. Thank God.
Both sick of
in
each
fact,
other.
I was just in Atlanta last week, and I was curious. I hadn't been back in a long time, and I was aware of that, and I thought, wow, this is a good, indicator that it's resolved and integrated. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. That's a good question, though.
If there aren't any more questions, I'd like to ask Janet to share about Ibert. Does everybody feel through with the questions? Anybody have more questions? Thank you, Diane. That was fascinating.
Very welcome.
Very, very fascinating.
Hi, Diane. And it has been fascinating. I've very much enjoyed this. I'm going to sneak in a quick thought or question because you were referring to timing. Mm-hmm. And as I look back over my life, I feel as if there has been almost a perfection of timing in certain things that have happened in my life. And I absolutely feel guided, but as I absolutely also know, everyone is guided. Whether or not we are open to it or pay attention to it is probably up to our personalities. So looking at it from the standpoint of a soul guidance as being one of the timings, as you were talking about, then combining that or taking a look at the physical personality and that timing, that brings in something of that perfection of timing that seems to happen sometimes in our lives whenever it's a major change, a major transition. Sometimes it's brought about perhaps by the personality, and sometimes it is brought about perhaps by the soul's push. What do you think?
I think it's very valid, Janet. I think that both occur. And I think it's often a matter of how much we're paying attention. You know, and also the design of our life and the purpose of our life.
Yeah.
You know, I think some people are here to really clear past life and to be aware of that, and others just aren't. Others are here to like climb the corporate ladder. You know, so
Right.
I'm just tossing that out as a hypothetical. You know, I think souls have different purposes, but you know, obviously everybody working in this field is here to, you know, explore these ideas and to heal very deeply on a soul level and to guide others and facilitate their healing.
Right. And that climbing the corporate ladder can be a part of the soul's purpose, the soul's intention for this lifetime.
For this lifetime, sure. Yeah.
Holly has given me an assignment, and I don't have any notes, Holly, because as you know, I was running late, and I apologize for being late and having trouble with my computer. As most of you know, Ibert is making some major changes, updates, I should say, and the board members are really excited about some of these things that we're bringing about. We have a great board. When we meet, we have fun. We bring together new ideas and challenge each other with these ideas, and are always enjoying the communication and the conversations and the plans that we have. Most of you have already learned about them with the newsletter, the e-newsletter that we send. And I don't know, so I've got to lean to Holly on this, how much we are ready to announce, but you have heard perhaps that we are needing to make some changes to expand, wanting to make some changes to expand our membership, inviting more and more people in who are in the field of raising consciousness, in the fields of the many, many different ways that are now opening and have been for many years, to open people to what is really quantum consciousness in whatever direction these fields go. So we are discussing an affiliate membership to IBRT members with the difference of non-certification, but welcoming them into the conversations that we are having. As you know, some of the gatherings are for members only, and some of our gatherings are open to the public for a fee. And that brought us to more and more of an expansion of looking to having affiliate members who will not be certified unless they move through that process that those of you who are certified have done. And in doing that, we really want your feedback. We want your feedback with ideas, with perhaps giving us some proposals for your own presentations at gatherings, and whatever else you might want to share in encouraging us to broaden everything that we are doing within the realms of spiritual teachings, past life therapy, and the other fields that feed into this, as Dianne has so well expressed in talking about the combining or taking a look at astrology as it can be added to or emphasized or combined with the value of helping people with memories of past lives. So Holly, I'm going to send it back to you. I don't know if I've covered anything that you really wanted me to cover.
Yes, we are going, also one other thing we're going to be doing is changing the fee schedule because we haven't had a raise in fees for 24 years. And we're going to change it so that it's a year instead of 2 years, so that we can have one date that I send out the due for everybody. Because right now, talk about three-dimensional chess. I've got to look at all different members having different dates. I'm not always on time for it. It's very confusing. We're going to have one date where everybody's membership is going to be sent out and requested. And if your date is not skewed up with it, you're going to get some free months of certification without having to pay. We decided that was Georgina's fabulous idea. So we're going to be sending out information about all of this. And I'm hoping that those of you who are not yet involved with IBERT will become affiliate members so that you can participate more actively in our programs and receive our newsletter. And Georgina has something to add. Thanks, Georgina. Your mic.
Ideas for the newsletter. We need articles, 400 words long. We need ideas for the newsletter, what it is you would like to see in the newsletter, what you would like to write for the newsletter. You send it to me or Kiki Waldron, either one of us, and we'd love to hear from you. Because the newsletter is for you and for everyone who's interested in energy work of any type.
Anything to add, Greg? Oh,
Mic's off.
mic's off.
We can't hear you.
No.
He's got to get his computer fixed.
Yeah, it's like I've got a pot boiling in the kitchen, but I forgot about it. Anyway, our meetings of the board are wonderful and very creative. And you can hear my dog agrees with me. So thank you. I'm so impressed with this lecture today and how the depth of it is mind-blowing and really wonderful. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Diane.
And those of you who are not yet members, we'll be putting you on our email list so you can find out about the affiliate membership. And please reach out to your communities. You know, all of you have communities where you're networking with other professionals that might be interested in joining us. And we really would love to have more people participate. Sure. So we're going to say goodbye now.
I think so.
All
Thank
right.
you all.
Bless you guys. Everybody take
Bye.
care.
Time to
Thank
wait.
you.
Next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
My
Wonderful.
pleasure, Peg. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Everyone too.
Thank you.